Have you ever heard words so simple yet so powerful that they cut straight through all the walls you've built around your heart? One winter morning, a millionaire CEO thought he had everything: power, wealth, control. But when a little girl in a faded pink hat looked up at him and whispered, "Everyone got a Christmas gift except me," his world stopped. In that moment, memories he had buried for decades came flooding back: nights without presents, a mother's quiet tears, and the lonely ache of being forgotten. What happened next would change not only his life, but the lives of an entire community. This is not just a Christmas story, it's a story of listening, of second chances, and of rediscovering what it truly means to belong. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to Loss and Healing for more stories that remind us of the power of hope. The December air carried a sharp bite that morning, the kind of cold that made breath hang heavy like ghosts. Yet for Grant Walker, the sting of the wind was nothing more than background noise. His navy overcoat had been tailored to perfection, lined with warmth, and in some way, it mirrored his life.
Mr. Thompson.
Everything around him had always been controlled, efficient, and impenetrable. People often described him as the kind of man who seemed immune to weather, immune to distraction, immune to anything that might disrupt his order. 2 blocks away, his driver had pulled to the curb, just as Grant had instructed. He didn't want fanfare. No reporters, no ribbon cutting, no forced photographs of him shaking hands with children. He had no interest in being plastered across social media as a generous CEO donating to his childhood school. That wasn't the point, or at least that was what he told himself. He wanted this to be quiet, unrecorded, a gift no one would ever know came from him. The school stood like a preserved relic of his past. Red brick walls with cracks running like veins, a rusted flagpole, windows painted a cheerful but slightly uneven blue. A new jungle gym had been added in the back: bright colors, shiny bolts, but instead of cheering the place, it only made him wonder how much of the old had simply been covered, disguised by layers of paint and steel. He held the envelope tighter in his gloved hand. Inside was a check large enough to cover supplies, repairs, even cafeteria upgrades. It was substantial, more than enough on paper. He told himself it should have been satisfying, but something in his chest already felt hollow. As he stepped into the front office, the smell wrapped around him in a way he hadn't expected. Disinfectant mixed with crayons, paper warmed by old radiators, and something faintly sweet, like wax. He remembered it instantly. It was the smell of being 7 years old, of standing in line for recess, of scribbling words onto wide-ruled paper. The receptionist, her hair silver and pulled neatly into a bun, looked up and smiled politely. He nodded, explaining he was there about a donation. Within minutes, he was ushered into a small conference room with Principal Green. She was gracious and professional, thanking him with sincerity but without prying. He liked that. Too many people in his world were always trying to take something: more credit, connection, or leverage. When she offered to post his name on the school social page, he shook his head. No names. No publicity. She raised her brows slightly, then smiled, perhaps surprised but respectful. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. This will mean so much for the children." He gave a small nod, his voice steady but distant. "I hope so." When he left, the hallway was filled with echoes of sneakers squeaking against tile and the laughter of children moving between classes. The sound irritated him more than he wanted to admit, reminding him of how far removed his life had become from these voices, from innocence itself. He quickened his pace, pushing through the front doors, and that was when he saw her. A small figure sat on the steps outside, knees tucked to her chest. Her coat was too big, swallowing her frame, and her blonde curls escaped from beneath a pink knit hat faded with age. A backpack leaned against her side like a weary companion. She wasn't wailing. Her sadness was quieter, heavier, like frost clinging to a window. Her cheeks were blotchy, her eyes red, but it was the stillness in her posture that struck him most. Grant slowed. Something tugged at him, an almost magnetic pull. He had spent decades perfecting the art of detachment, of walking past things without being moved. Yet this time, his body disobeyed. He crouched slightly, his voice gentle. "Are you all right?" The girl looked up. Her blue eyes were glassy, rimmed with fatigue far older than her 5 years. "Everyone got a Christmas gift," she whispered. "Except me." Grant's breath caught, his heart tightening in a way he hadn't felt in decades. Before he could
Here is your
respond,
schedule.
she added softly,
Oh,
like a
right.
line rehearsed over and over, "Santa forgot me again." Those words struck like a hammer
Cancel the
against
rest
a
of my
locked
meetings.
door inside him. Suddenly, he wasn't on those school steps anymore. He was 7 again, staring at a cheap plastic fire truck beneath a fake tree. His father gone, his mother's eyes lined with tears she tried to hide. The magic had evaporated that night, leaving silence and a truth he had carried but buried. Christmas was for other people. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Ellie," she said simply. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would bridge the impossible gap between them, but the words tangled in his throat. Before he could form them, Ellie added in a tone that was not bitter, just resigned. "My friend said Santa only brings gifts to kids who have dads." Grant's world tilted. The sentence pierced deeper than anything else she could have said. His chest burned with a memory. He thought he had destroyed the night. He realized no one was coming for him either. Ellie sniffled but kept her gaze steady. "But you listened," she murmured, almost like it was a gift in itself. Those 2 words disarmed him. You listened. He remembered nights when he had spoken into silence, begging for someone to hear. And here she was, 5 years old, already carrying the same wound. He should have left then. Polite words, a nod, and gone. That was the way he operated clean exits, no entanglements. But his feet remained anchored. Something about this child, her quiet truth, cracked through his armor. "Where's your mom, Ellie?" he asked softly. "She's inside, talking to my teacher. She said not to talk to strangers." She hesitated, searching his face. Not for danger, but for softness, for proof she mattered. And in that moment, he sat down beside her. The cold from the cement seeped through his coat, but he didn't move. For a long moment, neither spoke. She swung her legs gently, her voice small when it returned. "I really wanted a doll, one with yellow hair and blue eyes." "Like you," Grant said, his throat tight. She nodded, then added, "But it's okay." Mom lit a candle. She said Christmas is still Christmas even without presents. Grant swallowed hard. This little girl, with her patched backpack and oversized coat, had just given voice to something he had forgotten. The smallest acts could carry the weight of the world. And as he sat there, listening, something inside him shifted. He didn't know it yet, but this moment the whisper of a forgotten child on school steps was about to unravel his carefully built world. Grant returned to his penthouse that night, 31 floors above Nashville's glittering skyline. But the lights of the city failed to impress him. They twinkled like decorations for someone else's celebration. His espresso sat untouched on his desk, cooling beside a tablet glowing with unread emails, each demanding his attention. His assistant had already knocked twice, reminding him about calls with board members and quarterly reports. But the thought of those meetings felt like trying to breathe underwater. His mind was not in the boardroom anymore. It was on the school steps, on a little girl's trembling voice saying, "Santa forgot me again." On her resigned explanation, "Santa only brings gifts to kids who have dads." Grant leaned back in his leather chair, pressing 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. He had faced senators, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, crushed competitors without hesitation, yet 5 minutes with a child had left him undone. Her words weren't just sad, they were familiar. They carried the same hollow ache he once tried to silence beneath layers of wealth and structure. That night, he poured himself a whiskey neat, but it sat untouched. Instead, he stared at the amber liquid as if it might explain why his throat tightened each time he remembered Ellie's quiet eyes.
Dear?
He slept in fragments, half dreams where Christmas trees blurred with the sound of muffled sobs. In each dream, his mother's tired face blended with Ellie's, and the silence of being forgotten echoed louder than any business failure ever had. The next morning, Grant stood at his window, watching the city wake. Delivery trucks rumbled, horns blared, pedestrians hurried with coffee cups in hand. But his thoughts were elsewhere. Somewhere across town, Ellie was brushing her hair with her mother, pretending she was just like the other kids. He imagined her pulling her too big coat tight against the cold, carrying her frayed backpack, walking into a classroom filled with children who had shared their Christmas joy while she tried to hide her empty hands. By noon, he couldn't take it anymore. "Cancel the rest of my meetings," he told his assistant abruptly. Her eyes widened. "Sir? Cancel them. Reschedule. I have somewhere to be." She didn't press him. No one ever did. Grant was a man of few words and firm decisions. And this decision, irrational as it seemed, was the firmest he had made in years. The driver raised his brows in the rearview mirror when Grant ordered him back to the elementary school. But he didn't ask questions. Grant's life was built on secrets, on unspoken motives, and today was no different. The school let out just as they arrived. Children spilled onto the sidewalk in waves of laughter, their bright coats and backpacks painting the cold afternoon with color. Grant scanned the crowd until he saw her Ellie, with her pink knit hat and faded backpack. She wasn't laughing or running. She moved slowly, head down, kicking a pebble across the pavement as though she had nowhere important to be. Grant felt something in his chest shift. It wasn't pity, nor was it guilt. It was deeper than both. Something like recognition, as though he were watching his own childhood replayed in smaller steps. He followed her from a distance. His polished shoes crunched softly against the sidewalk as he trailed her down streets lined with boarded storefronts and forgotten houses. It was irrational, bordering on unsettling even to himself. But he needed to see where she went, what her world looked like beyond the brief encounter on the school steps. She turned down a narrow street and disappeared behind the gate of a small duplex. Its porch leaned to one side, the railing crooked, the paint peeling in strips. A tricycle lay overturned on a patch of frost-stiff grass. He lingered at the corner, staring at the house, the sight stirring something he thought he had buried with his mother's passing. Later that night, he opened a shoebox he hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photographs, faded colors, creased corners, memories he had locked away. One photo stopped him cold himself at 7 years old, cross-legged on a thin carpet beside a crooked Christmas tree. In his hands was a plastic red truck, his mother's forced smile frozen forever beside him. He had told her it was perfect, because even then he knew how much he had sacrificed to buy it. But he also remembered how the silence in that room had been deafening. No father, no carols, just the knowledge that magic belonged to other families. And now, decades later, Ellie had spoken the words he had once whispered in the dark. Santa forgot me. The following afternoon, Grant returned again. He told himself it was research understanding the impact of his donation, measuring community needs. But deep down, he knew better. He stood across the street as the school bell rang and children poured out once more. And again, he found her, Ellie, walking slowly, her coat zipper broken at the top. Follow her, he told his driver quietly. The car moved at a careful pace, trailing from side streets to avoid suspicion. Grant felt conflicted, ashamed at the idea of following a child, but unwilling to stop. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was a search for understanding, for connection, for a truth he could no longer ignore. She walked the same path as before, turning into the duplex with her backpack sliding from one shoulder. This time, Grant didn't just watch. He stepped out of the car, his polished shoes crunching against gravel as he approached the porch. Up close, the house was even more fragile appealing paint, a dangling porch light, a mailbox stuffed with unpaid bills and grocery circulars. When he knocked, the door opened a crack. A woman's face appeared worn but strikingly beautiful beneath the exhaustion. Her blonde hair was tied in a messy bun, shadows beneath her eyes. She blinked, startled. Yes? Grant cleared his throat. I met your daughter yesterday, on the school steps. Her body tensed instantly. You're the man she mentioned. I didn't mean to worry you, he said quickly. She seemed upset. We only talked for a moment. The woman's gaze sharpened. She told me about you. Said you listened. Grant's chest tightened. Ellie had said that word again. Listened. Something so small, yet powerful enough to dismantle his defenses. She opened the door wider. I'm Rachel, Ellie's mom. Her eyes narrowed suddenly. Wait, Walker. Grant Walker. The logistics company? That's me, he admitted. And then her warmth evaporated. Her voice was clipped, cold. So you're the reason I lost my job? The words landed like a blow. I what? Brighton Steel, she said. You bought the land 6 months ago. Shut down the factory. That was my job, our only income. Grant's throat constricted. He had signed papers, approved purchases, authorized expansions, but he had never thought of faces of families. To him, it was business numbers on a page. To Rachel, it had been rent, food, survival. I didn't know, he whispered. Of course you didn't, she snapped. To you, it's just another deal. To us, it was everything. She crossed her arms, her shoulders trembling with the weight of barely contained anger.
This is not charity.
I don't need your pity. We've been managing. Grant wanted to speak, to explain, but no words could erase the truth. He had taken something from them, not just stability, but dignity. In the silence that followed, Ellie's voice carried faintly from inside, "Mom, I'm home." Rachel's eyes flickered with pain, then steel. "We're done here." But as the door began to close, Grant heard his own mother's muffled sobs from decades ago, bleeding into the present. And he realized he couldn't walk away this time. Grant sat in silence long after Rachel had shut the door, the echo of her words clinging to him like frost. "You're the reason I lost my job." They were not just accusations. They were truths he had never been forced to face. Deals had always been ink on paper, acquisitions reduced to charts and balance sheets. He had never stood at the doorstep of someone whose life had crumbled because of his pen. Until now. That night, he could not bring himself to pour another drink. Instead, he paced his penthouse, hands buried deep in his pockets, his reflection in the tall windows a stranger staring back. For years, his life had been defined by control numbers, deadlines, power plays. Yet all it had taken was a little girl and her weary mother to expose the cracks in his empire. Ellie's words replayed again. "Santa forgot me again." Rachel's voice overlaid them. "We've been managing." And beneath it all, his mother's voice surfaced from memory, weary but tender, telling him that Christmas could still be Christmas, even with nothing under the tree. He remembered the candle she had lit that year, trying to disguise scarcity as tradition. Sleep refused him. Around 3 in the morning, Grant found himself rummaging through old boxes again, pulling out photographs he had once buried like shame. His childhood stared back at him in faded colors. A crooked tree, a frayed couch. His mother's smile stretched thin with exhaustion. He touched one photo where he sat clutching a small plastic truck. The corners were worn from years of being handled. The image felt like a mirror, not of who he was, but of who Ellie was now. By dawn, he made a decision. It wasn't enough to simply feel remorse. He had to do something. That afternoon, Grant drove to a small part of town he hadn't visited in decades. The streets were uneven. Storefronts clung to life with peeling signs, and holiday decorations sagged in windows that tried too hard to mask hardship. He pushed open the door of a tiny toy shop called Whimsy Hollow. A bell jingled overhead, and the smell of cedar and lavender filled the air. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with snow-white hair pinned up with a pencil, her glasses perched low on her nose. She looked at him with a softness he hadn't encountered in years. "Looking for something special?" she asked. "Yes," Grant replied, surprising himself with the immediacy of his answer. "A doll. For a little girl. She's 5. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and she's braver than most grown men I know." The woman studied him, then led him to a shelf lined with handmade dolls. Each one had a face that seemed to carry a story. He didn't hesitate when he saw her, the doll, with golden yarn hair braided neatly, light blue embroidered eyes, and a pale pink dress stitched with delicate white thread. "This one," he said. His voice cracked slightly. The woman's smile was knowing. "She's one of my favorites. Took me 2 days to finish. I always hope she finds someone who needs her." "She will," Grant said firmly. Then after a pause, "Can you add a name?" "Ellie," in gold thread. The woman nodded and set to work, her fingers steady and careful. Grant waited in silence, his heart beating slower, heavier, as though each stitch bound him to something larger than himself. When she finished, she placed the doll in a box lined with tissue and wrapped it with a satin bow the color of blush roses. She handed it to him as though it were glass. That evening, as dusk fell over Rachel and Ellie's neighborhood, Grant stood half a block away with the package pressed against his chest. His driver stayed behind as Grant walked alone, the weight of nerves churning inside him. He reached the porch, crouched, and set the box gently near the door. Sliding a handwritten note beneath the ribbon, he whispered the words he had written to himself, from someone who didn't forget. "Merry Christmas, Ellie." He knocked twice, softly, then walked away. From the safety of his car around the corner, he watched as the door creaked open. Ellie's curls appeared first, backlit by the glow of the porch light. She gasped, her little hands flying to her mouth. "Mom! Mom!" she cried, her voice bursting with more joy than he had imagined possible. Rachel appeared behind her, towel in hand, confusion etched into her tired features. But when she saw the box, she froze. Ellie fell to her knees, tugging at the ribbon with a child's urgency. When she lifted the lid, silence fell for a brief, holy moment. "She looks like me," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel bent low, reading the note. Her eyes lifted instinctively to scan the street, suspicion flickering even as her daughter's face glowed with wonder. "Mom," Ellie said again, tears welling in her eyes. "She has my name. It's really mine." Grant turned away then, unable to watch any longer. His throat tightened, his chest heavy, but somehow warmer than it had been in years. He hadn't expected that giving could feel like breathing again. The next day, Grant found himself drawn back to the schoolyard. Recess was in full swing. Children ran across the frosty ground, their shouts filling the air. On a bench near the jungle gym sat Ellie, cradling the doll in her lap. She spotted him almost instantly, her eyes lighting up like the winter sun breaking through clouds. "Grant!" she called, her mittened hand waving furiously. For a man who had been feared in boardrooms, her joy disarmed him completely. He walked toward her slowly, unsure of what role he was stepping into. "This is Luna," Ellie said proudly, lifting the doll. "That's her name now. She told me to tell you thank you. She says she's never been hugged this much." Grant smiled, feeling his heart trip over itself. "She's beautiful," he said softly. "And you're very welcome." They sat quietly for a moment, the kind of silence that felt safe. Ellie swung her legs gently, her voice breaking it with a sudden burst of sincerity. "I told Luna about my dream," she said. "What dream is that?" "I'm going to open a restaurant one day," she declared, her eyes bright. "Not just any restaurant, a special one, with big windows, flowers on every table, and food for everyone, even kids who can't pay. Especially at Christmas." Grant blinked, his throat tightening. She pulled a crayon drawing from her backpack and handed it to him. On the page was a pink building with large windows, a garden, and 3 stick figures standing side by side. One with long yellow hair, one with a ponytail, and one tall man in a suit. "That's me," she pointed. "That's Mommy. And that's you." Grant stared at the drawing, his chest aching in the strangest way. She had written him into her future, without hesitation, without fear. "You can be in it if you want," she said seriously. "We can be a team." Grant swallowed hard, his voice quiet. "I'd like that." She beamed, hugging Luna closer. "Luna thinks so too." He chuckled, the sound foreign but welcome in his throat. The bell rang, ending recess, but Ellie didn't leave before she looked at him one more time. "Thanks for remembering me," she said, her voice a whisper of gratitude and hope. "Most people forget." "I won't," Grant said. "I promise." As she ran off toward her class, Luna bouncing against her arm, Grant sat on the bench a little longer, the crayon drawing fluttering in his hand. For the first time in decades, he felt as though he wasn't standing on the outside of someone else's life. He felt invited in. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm Grant had never known before. For years, his life had been structured around schedules, financial reports, and endless flights to cities where glass towers stretched skyward. But now his calendar was quietly changing. Board meetings were skipped, charity galas ignored, dinners with powerful investors canceled. Instead, he found himself drifting toward a little duplex on a narrow Nashville street, pulled by something he couldn't quite name but no longer resisted. At first, he told himself it was oversight. He needed to ensure the school donation had been used properly. He needed to understand the community's struggles so his philanthropy could be more strategic. It was a good excuse, one his board might even applaud. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous to the armor he had worn for years. He missed Ellie. There was something about her laughter that clung to him, even in silence. The way she dreamed with such boldness about restaurants that fed the hungry and gardens full of sunflowers made the chaos in his own mind go still. She looked at the world with wide-open eyes, and in her gaze, Grant found a reflection of who he had once been before ambition had stripped away wonder. One chilly Saturday, Grant arrived unannounced. Rachel answered the door, her hair tied back, flour dusting her cheek. She looked startled at first, but not unkind. "Didn't expect you today," she said. He hesitated. Ellie asked if we could build a snowman. Rachel glanced past him at the frostbitten yard. "There's no snow." Grant allowed himself a faint smile. "She said we could use pillows." Rachel laughed, a sound he hadn't heard before from her warm, unguarded. "She's in the back. And thank you," she added, her tone softer, For the coat and boots! I know it was you! I just wanted her to be warm. Rachel's eyes lingered on him a moment longer before she stepped aside. She thinks the hot cocoa is a tradition now. It is, he said simply, walking through the doorway. Out back, Ellie was crouched over a pile of old cushions. Luna the doll propped beside her like a foreman supervising construction. When she saw him, her face lit up. You're here. We have work to do. Together, they stacked pillows into lopsided towers, declaring them the greatest snowman Nashville had ever seen. Luna wore a sock as a scarf, and Ellie insisted she serve as Queen of Winter. When they stepped back to admire their creation, Ellie handed him a small cup of cocoa, a lukewarm and slightly gritty from a packet, but sacred in her hands. This is our tradition now, she declared. Grant held the cup carefully, letting its warmth seep into his palms. It's the best one I've got. Later that evening, Rachel stepped out to the porch where Grant sat, watching the winter stars scatter across the sky. She leaned against the railing, her arms folded tightly. You've become part of her world, she said quietly.
Yes, that sounds
Grant
good.
looked up at her. Is that all right? Rachel hesitated. I'm still figuring that out. Her voice carried an edge, the tone of a woman who had been forced to guard everything: her child, her pride, her survival. I know I don't deserve her trust, Grant admitted, or yours, but I'm not here for appearances. Her eyes narrowed. Then why are you here? Is it guilt? Some way to patch the holes your company left behind? Or is it ego, a redemption arc you can show off at the next board dinner? Grant turned to face her fully, his voice steady. At first, yes, it was guilt. Then it was anger at myself, at what I'd become. But now, he faltered, searching for the words, now it feels like
Welcome.
need. I need
Please,
this.
come
I
in.
need her. I need you, both of you, to remind me what it's like to feel something real. Rachel's jaw tightened. She's a child,
What is all
an
this?
open-hearted one. She doesn't need a maybe. She needs someone steady. I want to be that, Grant said, his voice dropping lower. I know I have to earn it. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the street lamp and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Finally, Rachel exhaled, the stiffness in her shoulders easing just slightly. She made banana muffins this morning, she said at last. We've got extras. Grant smiled faintly. Are you offering me one? Her lips curved into the smallest smile. No, I'm offering one to Luna's friend. Big difference. For the first time in years, he laughed a deep, genuine laugh that startled even him. The following week, Grant did something he had avoided for nearly 5 years. He called his younger brother Ben. Their last conversation had been at their mother's funeral, ending in bitterness. Ben had accused him of burying grief under business deals, of abandoning family for ambition, and Grant had walked away, convincing himself he didn't need anyone. But this time, when Ben answered, Grant's voice was softer. Hey, I was wondering if we could meet. Ben paused. I thought you were allergic
help
to
your
coffee
dream grow.
shops and people. I might
Thank
be,
you. I really appreciate
Grant said, but I'm willing to risk it. They met at a quiet cafe. Ben arrived late, his expression skeptical but curious. You look softer, Ben remarked, sliding into the booth. Don't start, Grant muttered. I'm still terrible at small talk. But slowly, over steaming mugs of coffee, Grant told him about Ellie, about Rachel, about Luna the doll and the pillow snowman in the backyard, about realizing he didn't want his name carved into another tower, if it meant leaving broken lives beneath it. You've changed, Ben said finally, his voice quieter now. I'm trying, Grant admitted. I don't know what comes next, but I know it isn't glass buildings. Ben leaned back, studying his brother. You ever heard of worker-owned cooperatives? Grant blinked. I'm listening. And for the first time in years, he meant it. That evening, as Ellie colored at the kitchen table, she pulled out a new drawing for Grant. It was another restaurant, this time with sunflowers in the windows and a garden full of vegetables. She handed him a crayon-scribbled menu. Muffins, cocoa, soup. Think I could help build this one day? Grant asked. She didn't even look up. Only if you promise to listen when we pick paint colors. He laughed, raising his hand in mock solemnity. Deal! In that moment, as she handed him another cup of cocoa less lumpy than the last, Grant realized the truth. This wasn't just about changing Ellie's life. It was about saving his own. The truth had been hanging between them like a storm cloud. For weeks, Grant had visited Rachel and Ellie, slowly becoming part of their world-building pillow snowmen, sharing mugs of cocoa, laughing at Ellie's bright imagination. But inside, guilt gnawed at him. Every time he walked through Rachel's door, every time Ellie called his name with joy, the weight of what he hadn't confessed pressed harder against his chest. One late afternoon, as the winter sun stretched thin across the bare branches, Grant knew he could no longer carry it. He stood outside their small duplex, staring at the crooked porch steps, his hands clenched in his coat pockets. His heart pounded with the kind of fear no boardroom had ever given him. For once, this wasn't about negotiation or control, it was about honesty. And honesty terrified him. When Rachel opened the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel, she looked surprised but not unkind. Ellie peeked from behind her legs, Luna tucked under her arm, eyes wide with curiosity. "Can we talk?" Grant asked quietly. His voice was rougher than usual, stripped of its practiced calm. Rachel hesitated, then told Ellie to go play in her room. Once the door clicked shut, Rachel stepped outside, folding her arms as the cold air wrapped around them. Grant took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. "There's something I should have told you from the beginning. I'm the one who bought the Brighton Steel site. I'm the reason the factory closed."
Thank you, dear.
For a moment, silence swallowed everything. Rachel's eyes narrowed, her expression sharpening with a kind of quiet fury. "You what?" Her voice was low, but it carried thunder. "I didn't know you worked there," he said quickly. "I didn't know the families. To me, it was another property deal. Numbers on a page, an expansion strategy. But after I met Ellie, after I saw what you've been carrying, I realized what I'd taken." Rachel's arms stayed folded, her posture rigid. "You came into my house. You sat at my table. You brought my daughter gifts. All while knowing this? At first, no," Grant admitted. "But once I knew, I couldn't walk away. I saw it in her eyes, Rachel. In yours. I saw what I had broken. And I can't erase it, but I can try to rebuild." Her laugh was bitter. "You think a doll fixes that? You think hot cocoa and promises undo the fact that I had to tell my daughter there wouldn't be gifts under the tree?" "No," Grant said softly. His voice didn't waver. "I don't think any gift can fix it. That's why I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to change it." Rachel's eyes flickered with something skepticism maybe, but also the faintest crack of curiosity. "I want to return the land," Grant continued. "Not sell it, not build another logistics hub. I want to fund the creation of a cooperative, a place run by the people Brighton displaced, a community kitchen, job training, small businesses, something sustainable, something that gives back what was taken." Rachel blinked, stunned. "And you expect me to believe that?" "No," he said. "I don't expect belief. I expect anger. I expect doubt. But I'm asking you to help lead it, to give it shape, not for me, for Ellie, for families like yours, for kids who need to know someone is listening." Her arms stayed folded, but her eyes softened just slightly. She looked away, staring at the cracked sidewalk as if weighing the truth of his words. "You don't understand what it's like," she said finally. Her voice trembled, but not with fear, with exhaustion. "To watch everything fall apart overnight. To smile through dinners of canned soup and pretend it's a feast. To light a candle and tell your daughter it's still Christmas, even when your heart is breaking." "I do," Grant whispered. Her eyes snapped back to him, ready to reject the claim, but his expression stopped her. For the first time, he told her everything. He spoke of a rusting trailer outside Memphis, of the father who left one December without a word, of his mother who worked double shifts and still came home smiling through exhaustion, trying to make Christmas magical with paper stars taped to windows. He told Rachel about the night he stopped believing in Santa, not because anyone told him, but because he realized no one was coming. "I buried all of it," he said quietly. "I built walls out of money and contracts until nothing could touch me. I thought that made me safe. But then Ellie sat on those steps and said the same words I once whispered. And suddenly, I wasn't safe anymore. I was awake." Rachel studied him for a long moment, her expression caught between pain and something softer. "Why us? Why her?" "I don't know," Grant admitted, "but I do know I can't walk away from you. From her. Not now."
So sorry.
The silence stretched, heavy but alive. Finally, Rachel's voice broke through, firm but trembling with possibility. "You'll have to prove it. This isn't charity. This is our lives. And if you fail, Ellie pays the price. I won't let that happen. Grant nodded, the tension in his chest loosening with her words. I'll prove it, and you won't have to do this alone. From inside the house came the creak of small footsteps. Ellie appeared at the door, Luna tucked under one arm and a crayon drawing in her other hand. She ran down the steps, her eyes shining. Grant, she said breathlessly, I made a new picture. It's our restaurant. Look, big windows, sunflowers, and a bench for you when you get tired. Grant crouched, taking the drawing in his hands. His throat tightened as he saw himself sketched into her dream again. Not as a visitor, but as part of her team. Rachel stood behind them. Her arms no longer folded, her posture no longer quite so guarded. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The smallest shift in her expression said it all. Maybe, just maybe, she was willing to let him try. That night, Grant lay awake in his penthouse, the crayon drawing on his nightstand.
Here you go.
For once, he wasn't thinking about quarterly forecasts or expansion strategies. He was thinking about a child who refused to give up hope, and a woman who demanded truth instead of pity. He was thinking about the word Ellie had given him, the one that had cracked his world open. The transformation began quietly, almost invisibly, like snow falling at night. At first, there were only meeting small gatherings in the old Brighton Steel building, its walls still echoing with the memory of machines long gone. Grant sat among former workers, teachers, and neighbors, his tailored suit traded for sweaters and rolled sleeves. He spoke less than he listened. It was not easy for him, a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. But this was different. Here, everyone had a voice. Here, he was not the owner, he was a participant. Rachel watched skeptically at first. She expected him to vanish after a week, retreating to his penthouse life once the weight of real change settled in. But day after day, he returned. He carried lumber, unloaded paint buckets, even helped patch drywall with hands unaccustomed to calluses. People whispered at first, unsure if the millionaire was merely staging redemption. But when the cameras never came, when no press releases were drafted, the whispers grew quieter. Slowly, they began to believe he might be serious. Ben, his younger brother, became a fixture too. He handled logistics, mediated disputes, and helped design a structure that would allow the cooperative to thrive.
That's good.
Together, the two brothers rebuilt not only a business but also a relationship fractured by years of silence. You ever think we'd be doing this together? Ben asked one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. No, Grant admitted, his voice raw. But I think this is what Mom would have wanted. Ben's eyes softened. Yeah, she'd be proud. Meanwhile, Ellie became the heartbeat of the project. She arrived after school with her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders, eager to show off new drawings for the cooperative. Each sketch grew boldersome with rooftop gardens, others with a hug station for anyone who felt sad. Do you think we can plant real sunflowers? She asked Grant one evening, her curls spilling from beneath her knit hat. I think we can plant a whole field, he replied. Her smile, wide and unguarded, felt like sunlight breaking through the coldest winter sky. Rachel's role grew naturally. She began coordinating the community kitchen, turning simple recipes into meals that filled the air with warmth. People came not only for food but for fellowship, and Rachel stood at the center of it, her tired eyes glowing with a new kind of strength. Grant often found himself watching her, quietly admiring the way she moved through the space, commanding respect without force, leading with both steel and compassion. One evening, after the last volunteer had left, they sat in the newly painted kitchen, mugs of cocoa steaming between them. Rachel stirred hers absent-mindedly, glancing at him over her shoulder. You ever think you'd end up here? She asked. Not in a million years, he replied honestly. But I don't think I've ever wanted to be anywhere else. She studied him for a long moment, then set her mug down. You're not the man I thought you were. I'm still trying not to be, he said softly. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something better, possibility. As Christmas approached, the cooperative buzzed with life. Volunteers decorated the garden beds with strings of recycled lights. The bakery shelves filled with loaves of bread baked by former factory workers who now called themselves artisans. A sewing corner buzzed with machines, repairing old clothes and stitching new beginnings. The reading room, stocked with donated books, echoed with children's laughter. Ellie darted through it all, her red sweater bright as she proudly gave tours to anyone who would listen. She showed off the kitchen, the bakery, the play area, and the garden with the authority of a CEO in miniature. "This is where everyone belongs," she declared one afternoon, holding Grant's hand as they stood beneath the freshly painted sign. The words glistened in white letters. "Ellie's table where everyone belongs." Grant's chest tightened at the sight. He had built skyscrapers, signed billion-dollar deals, but nothing had ever felt as monumental as those 5 words. On Christmas Eve, the cooperative opened its doors to the neighborhood. The air was thick with the smell of cinnamon, bread, and simmering soup. Music drifted through the halls, not polished or professional, but joyful, played on borrowed instruments and sung by voices that had been silenced too long. Families poured in, parents clutching children's hands, neighbors embracing with laughter, elders sitting down to meals without worry of cost. Grant stood near the entrance, his navy sweater warm against the cold. No tie, no briefcase. He was not there as a CEO, but as something far more human. Ellie tugged at his hand, pulling him into the main hall. "Merry Christmas," she beamed, handing him a small wrapped box. Inside was a felt ornament shaped like a heart, stitched unevenly with pink thread. A card in crayon read, "You didn't forget, so I won't ever forget you." Grant swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. "Ellie, this is the best gift I've ever received." She hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Rachel stood nearby, a tray of cookies in her hands. This time, her smile wasn't cautious. It was soft,
what is one of your
real.
strengths?
Later, as snow began to fall outside, Grant stepped onto the porch. The air was crisp, the world quiet except for laughter spilling from the cooperative. Rachel joined him, a blanket around her shoulders. "You did it," she said.
Good.
"We did it,"
Just a
he
little
corrected.
squeeze now.
She tilted her head, studying him. "You're not going back, are you?" He shook his head slowly. "I've already filed the papers. I'm stepping down. No more boardrooms, no more towers. I want to build places like this, places where people belong." Rachel's eyes softened. "That's a big change. It's the only change that's ever felt right." Inside, Ellie called out, her voice bright. "Come see what I drew for next year's
So how's your
restaurant
new project
upgrade."
going?
Grant smiled,
It's coming along
already
quite well,
moving
actually.
toward the door. For the first time in decades, he felt like he was walking into something, not away. He wasn't building empires anymore, he was building roots. And as he stepped back into the warmth of laughter, cocoa, and crayons,
Look!
Grant knew this was no longer about redemption. This was about family, about home. Snow fell gently across Nashville that Christmas morning, softening the edges of a city too often defined by steel and glass. But inside the cooperative, warmth radiated like a living heartbeat. The smell of fresh bread and cocoa filled the air. Laughter rose from the reading corner, and neighbors shared
down
meals
with
at
your thumb on
long
the
wooden
dough
tables
as you
where
turn
no
it.
one sat alone. Grant stood near the entrance, not as a CEO, not as a figure of power, but as a man who had finally laid his armor down. For years, he had
This is the
believed
worst.
control was safety, that wealth was protection,
right?
that silence was strength. But then a little girl whispered, "Santa forgot me again," and everything he thought he knew collapsed. In her eyes, he saw his own forgotten
no.
childhood.
Oh,
And in her
wow.
simple words, he found a truth powerful enough to change not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. Rachel moved through the kitchen with quiet grace, her hands steady as she served plates of steaming food. Ellie ran between tables, Luna the doll tucked under her arm, her laughter carrying like bells. For the first time, Grant felt something he had long dismissed as childish: belonging. He wasn't an outsider observing from a distance. He was part of the story now, invited in, needed, loved. That night, as the fire crackled in Rachel's small living room, Grant watched Ellie hang the felt heart ornament on their crooked Christmas tree. She turned to him with that same disarming sincerity and said, "Santa remembered this year, but really you came." Her words lodged deep, a promise and a gift all at once. He pulled her close, whispering against her hair, "You reminded me what it means to believe again." Outside, the city glowed with holiday lights. But for Grant, the only light that mattered was here in a crooked tree, a child's laughter, a mother's steady presence, and a community
Look how big
reborn
they
through
are.
hope. This was
know,
not
they're
redemption for
beautiful.
him. This was rebirth.
Can we
And it
catch
all
one?
began because he finally chose to listen. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness can heal wounds deeper than we know, then join us. Subscribe to Loss and Healing and become part of a community that believes in second chances, in hope restored, and in love that shows up when it matters most. Because sometimes the greatest gifts are not found under the tree, they are found in the moments when we choose to listen, to care, and to believe again.